Welcome to Somnia Lore, your place for peaceful, sleepy adventures. Subscribe, hit the bell, like, comment, and share.
It begins, as most forgotten things do, with a sound. Not loud, not clear, just a small, trembling laugh drifting through the dark between galaxies. It floats inside a bottle made of old glass and faint starlight turning slowly, endlessly in the current of space. No one knows who placed it there or why. Some say it was meant for someone who once built entire worlds only to lose the quiet within them. Others say it was meant for you listening now, breathing softly under the slow rhythm of the night. Hey there. Before we go further, know this. We truly love you. The universe, this story, even the voice telling it all holds you gently tonight. We hope you feel that. And before we begin the tale, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Maybe it's midnight, maybe dawn is barely touching your curtains. Either way, you're safe here. Take a breath. Let's begin. The bottle turns once more, catching the faint shimmer of a distant sun, and as it does, the sound grows clearer. Just a single burst of laughter from a boy who once thought the stars were puzzles waiting to be solved. His name was Rick. Not the man you've heard of, the loud one, the genius drenched in cynicism, but the boy before all that. The boy who believed sound itself had feelings. When Rick was small, he built things to understand silence. He'd sit alone in his room, surrounded by half-finished circuits and empty soda cans, trying to make machines that could hum back to him. His mother used to say he had thunder in his veins. "You can't teach lightning to rest," she'd whisper, as she brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. And he'd laugh, not knowing that one day her words would haunt the corners of every invention he ever made. Their house was small, pressed between forests and broken telephone poles. At night, Rick would lie awake, listening to the hum of insects and the slow groan of the sky before a storm. He liked storms. They felt alive, like the world was breathing. Once he asked his mother why thunder sounded like it was crying. She smiled and said, "Maybe it's laughing instead, sweetheart. Maybe the sky's just remembering something funny." He didn't understand, but he liked the idea that even pain could sound like laughter if you listened long enough. When she died, he tried to build a thunder machine. He was 12. It was meant to speak in the language of storms, to mimic her laugh, to fill the air with something more than stillness. He stayed up for 3 days, soldering pieces together until his fingers shook. When he flipped the switch, it sparked once, then went quiet. He waited, staring at it in the dark, until dawn arrived and painted the metal gold. Then he laughed, softly, brokenly, because even failure sounded a little like her voice. Years passed, and the boy learned how to bury wonder beneath equations. He grew sharper, colder, brilliant beyond reason. But sometimes, in the middle of his experiments, he'd pause. The hum of a wire, the hiss of gas escaping from a valve, the low vibration of the lab table, it all reminded him of that first storm. He'd close his eyes and imagine she was still somewhere above him, laughing quietly through the rain. The bottle's laughter keeps turning. Somewhere far away, a portal flickers, lighting the void in pale green. Inside, infinite versions of him stir, each carrying the same fragment of sound, the same unspoken longing. Some try to drown it out with invention. Others chase it through endless worlds. But the one we speak of now, the one whose story you're hearing, he's different. He doesn't want to escape the sound anymore. He wants to understand it. He remembers the first time he realized he could bend the rules of reality. It wasn't a grand discovery. It was an accident like most miracles. He'd been experimenting with frequency fields in his garage, trying to build a radio that could pick up the silence between sounds. When he adjusted one of the dials too far, the air split open. A shimmering ring appeared, humming at a pitch only he seemed to recognize. Through it he heard something impossible, his own voice, younger, laughing. The same laugh from the bottle, echoing back to him from nowhere. He stepped closer. The air smelled of ozone and rain. His reflection trembled inside the portal, half curious, half afraid. He wanted to reach through, to grab hold of that sound, to bring it back to a world that had forgotten how to laugh. But the portal collapsed before he could move. All that was left was a faint ringing in his ears, like the echo of a heartbeat. After that day, he became obsessed. He filled notebooks with theories about overlapping timelines, sound as memory, and the physics of loss. He didn't tell anyone what he was really searching for. To his colleagues, he was a genius chasing infinite universes. But deep down, he was just a boy trying to find the voice that once told him thunder could laugh. Years later, when people saw him stumble through space with a flask in one hand and a weapon in the other, they called him cold, detached, dangerous. They never saw the quiet hours when he'd stare at the stars, whispering questions into them like prayers. "Oh, do you remember her too?" he'd ask. "Do you remember that laugh?" Sometimes, if the ship was silent enough, he could almost hear the bottle again. Tonight, the bottle drifts closer to a dying sun. The glass catches light, flickers, and for an instant the laughter spills out, soft and distant. It drifts past comets, planets, memories of all the worlds Rick once walked. And for those who listen carefully, it sounds almost human again. In one universe, a child looks up at the sky and hears that faint laughter, thinking it's a shooting star. In another, Morty dreams of it without knowing why. Just a warm sound that makes him feel safe, like someone somewhere still cares. And in the quietest corner of the cosmos, Rick stirs from a half-sleep, sensing the echo as it brushes the edge of his mind. He doesn't wake. He just smiles in his sleep, as if remembering something long ago, something soft, something that once made the storms laugh. The stars move slowly. The bottle spins once more, the sound fading until only the silence remains. But even silence has texture if you listen closely. It carries warmth. It carries memory. It carries a kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. If you're still awake, let it wash over you the way sound does when it finally lets go of meaning. Maybe you can hear her laugh too, hidden beneath the hum of your own world, gentle and small but endlessly alive. Maybe that's what Rick was always trying to find. Not a new universe, but an old sound returning home. Somewhere beyond everything, the bottle drifts through one last ring of light. It's empty now, but the laugh has already done its work. It reminded the stars of their own music. And the stars, patient as ever, hum back softly, carrying the note farther, farther still, until it reaches you. So rest. The story has only just begun, but for now, there's no need to understand it. Just breathe. The bottle turns. The sound fades. And the boy who once tried to fix thunder dreams of laughter in the rain. The storm came softly that night, as if trying not to wake the sleeping world. Wind sighed through the trees, brushing the thin windows of the Smith house. In the half-dark, the young boy sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by small metal scraps and empty batteries, his hands trembling with anticipation. Rick's eyes reflected the flickering lamplight like tiny stars, restless, full of the kind of curiosity that never sleeps. He wasn't afraid of thunder anymore. He was trying to fix it. Outside, the clouds pulsed like a heartbeat. His latest machine, a tangle of copper wires and spoons stolen from the kitchen, was meant to calm the sky, to teach it how to breathe quietly. Every time lightning flashed, he'd press a button, trying to catch the sound before it roared. He thought, maybe if he could make thunder gentle, it would stop reminding him of how empty the house had become. He remembered her voice sometimes, faint as static through an old radio. His mother's laughter had a texture, a rhythm that matched the wind. When she was alive, storms never frightened him. They'd sit by the window, her fingers tapping the glass in time with the rain, and she'd whisper, "It's only the world washing its face. Rick, that's all thunder really is." He used to believe her completely. But now thunder sounded like something crying in the distance. His father didn't talk much after she was gone, just the clink of bottles, the hollow shuffle of feet. So Rick filled the silence himself. He built machines that clicked and hummed and blinked at him like tiny, loyal stars. He named each one after sounds he missed: echo, hush, whisper, hum. Sometimes he spoke to them just to hear another voice answer. "Don't worry," he'd say to a spinning coil or a trembling bulb. "I'll figure it out. I'll fix everything." That night he thought he almost had. The storm outside grew louder, trembling against the roof. He touched two wires together, and his machine shivered, glowing blue. It made a low, steady hum, like the sound of a throat clearing before it speaks. He felt a pulse through his fingertips, warm, alive. He laughed, small and bright, the way children do when the impossible suddenly feels close enough to touch. Then lightning struck the yard. The lamp burst. The room filled with a flash so white it erased everything for a moment. When the light faded, the machine was smoking. He sat there, blinking through tears he hadn't realized were falling. The smell of burnt metal filled the air. The hum was gone. Only thunder remained, mocking him with its great rolling laughter. He crawled under his bed, clutching a screwdriver, listening to the storm tear through the night. "You're not funny," he whispered to the thunder. "You're just loud." But part of him knew his mother would have disagreed. She would have said the sky was only teasing, that even chaos could be kind if you looked at it the right way. He pressed his palms against his ears and imagined her voice instead, the soft hum, the warmth of her breath as she said his name. Somewhere between the cracks of thunder, he drifted into sleep. He dreamt of light. Not the cold white of lightning, but a softer kind, like the glow inside a seashell. He stood in a field where the clouds hung low, close enough to touch. When he reached up, his hand passed through them, and they rippled with laughter. Her laughter. It surrounded him, gentle, endless, unbroken. "You did it," she whispered, though he couldn't see her. "You fixed the thunder." When he woke, the storm was gone. Morning light stretched across the floor, touching the burnt metal like forgiveness. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and found something strange. His machine was humming again, softly, weakly, as if something in the night had taught it what to do. He placed his ear close. It wasn't just a hum, it was a rhythm. 3 notes, faint but deliberate, repeating like a heartbeat. For days, he couldn't stop listening. He took the machine apart, rebuilt it, connected new wires, and every time he turned it on, the hum returned. Never louder, never clearer, but alive. It became his secret lullaby, his proof that something unseen was still watching over him. He started recording the sound on an old cassette player. He'd play it at night when the world outside felt too big. The neighbors called him odd. Teachers called him gifted. His father called him nothing at all. But Rick didn't care. He'd found something the rest of them couldn't hear, a frequency of comfort, a thread between loneliness and hope. One evening, a few weeks later, he brought the recorder outside. The sun was low, the sky half gold, half bruised with lingering clouds. He sat in the grass, replaying the hum. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. For the first time, thunder rolled gently above him, quiet, as though it were listening back. Rick smiled. From that day on, storms never scared him again. In fact, he started looking for them. Whenever lightning cracked the horizon, he'd set his machines by the window, trying to catch the moment when the sky's heartbeat aligned with his. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of everything. The moment curiosity and longing became one and would never again untangle. Sometimes, late at night when sleep refused to come, he'd talk to the machine. "Do you think she can hear me?" He'd ask it softly. "Do you think she's still somewhere in the noise?" And though the machine never answered, the hum always seemed a little warmer afterward. Years would pass before he built anything like a portal. But in that dim, forgotten bedroom surrounded by static and sparks, the first seed of infinity was already growing. His fear of silence was the soil. His love for a vanished voice was the rain. Every wire he twisted, every screw he tightened, was a small prayer disguised as science. One night, while adjusting the recorder, he heard something new in the playback, a faint crackle that didn't belong. He turned the volume up. Beneath the hum there was another sound. Laughter. Short, bright, impossible. He froze. It was her. Just for a second, maybe two, but it was her laugh. He ran the tape back again and again until the ribbon wore thin, but the sound never repeated. Still, it didn't matter. He'd heard enough to know she wasn't gone. Not really. From then on, Rick stopped trying to fix thunder. He let it speak however it wanted. Instead, he focused on the spaces between the noise, the pauses, the quiet intervals where memory hides. And in those spaces, he began to understand something he couldn't yet name, that maybe the universe wasn't cold or empty after all. Maybe it was just waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear it breathe. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain through his open window. He set the recorder down and closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, low and kind, like a tired friend saying goodnight. The hum from his machine joined in softly, keeping time with his heartbeat. And though he didn't know it, far beyond his world, a small bottle spun through the stars, carrying the same laugh he'd just rediscovered. It turned once, catching the faint light of a distant galaxy, and the sound shimmered inside it, a promise, a memory, a lullaby traveling endlessly toward the place where all storms finally sleep. The garage smelled of oil and rain-soaked dust. It had become his cathedral, walls lined with wires and bent tools, the ceiling dripping with the slow rhythm of leaks that no one bothered to fix. Rick was older now, not yet the man the multiverse would fear, but far enough from the boy who tried to fix thunder that his laughter came less easily. His machines hummed like a low choir, each one whispering secrets only he could understand. He sat at the workbench with his head bowed, soldering iron glowing like a small sun in his hand. A radio played softly in the corner, the signal fading in and out, voices dissolving into static. He didn't mind the static anymore. It reminded him of breathing, impermanent, unpredictable, real. Outside, the night leaned heavy against the windows. He could see his reflection in the glass, dark circles under his eyes, a smear of grease on his cheek, that restless spark still burning behind tired pupils. He pushed his goggles higher, exhaled, and whispered to himself, "Let's try again." The circuit before him wasn't meant to be important. It was just another in a long chain of small experiments, an attempt to catch frequencies that didn't belong to any station, any world. But somewhere deep in his mind, he knew what he was really searching for. The hum, the laugh, that same rhythm that once filled his childhood nights. He'd heard it in dreams lately, distant and almost tender. He flipped the switch. A faint shimmer passed through the air. The light bulb above him flickered once, then steadied. The radio's static deepened, became layered, textured, almost melodic. He leaned closer. For a moment, he swore he could hear something beneath it, a voice, a familiar one, tangled in the noise. Then it was gone. He ran a hand through his hair, muttered a curse, then laughed under his breath. "Always teasing me, aren't you?" he said to the empty air. Just like before, a drop of rain hit the window. Then another. Soon, the garage filled with the quiet percussion of a growing storm. He didn't turn away. He loved storms still, though he'd never admit it aloud. They made him feel like the universe was alive, restless, unsatisfied, just like him. He returned to the table and adjusted the frequency knob, watching the dial quiver as if uncertain of which reality it belonged to. When he turned it past a certain point, something strange happened. The hum returned, but this time it was different.
It wasn't coming from the machine.
It was coming from everywhere. The walls vibrated softly. The air thickened, bending light into faint colors. The leak above the workbench froze mid-drip, the droplets suspended like glass. Rick's breath caught in his throat. "No way," he whispered. A faint circle of light appeared above the floor, spinning slowly, almost shyly. It wasn't dramatic, no thunderclap, no explosion, just a quiet opening, like a curtain being pulled aside by unseen hands. Through it, he saw motion, shifting shadows, flashes of blue sky, another garage perhaps, or maybe another version of this one. The hum deepened into something like a heartbeat. He should have been afraid. He wasn't. Curiosity burned through him like a pulse. He took a cautious step closer. The light rippled in response, widening, beckoning. "You again," he said, half to himself, half to the void.
You couldn't just let me rest, could you?
The air around him smelled faintly of ozone and lilacs, the same scent that used to cling to his mother's clothes. His hands shook.
He reached out.
The moment his fingertips brushed the light, 1,000 sounds spilled through at once. Laughter, whispers, music, the crash of distant waves. They folded into one another, layered like dreams within dreams. And then, among them, he heard it, the laugh. Clearer now, younger, familiar in a way that ached. It lasted only a second before the portal collapsed, the circle shrinking back into nothing. The droplet above the table fell at last, splashing onto the metal. The room went dark.
Only the hum of the old radio remained, fragile and alive. Rick stood there, staring at the empty air, his heart racing.
He didn't move for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "I heard you." His voice cracked. "You're still out there?" He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he filled pages of his notebook with sketches, formulas, and questions. Was it time distortion?
A frequency echo, a dream?
Every answer he wrote only led to another question. But one thought kept returning, scrawled again and again in the margins. It laughed. By dawn, the first prototype of the portal gun was taking shape. It wasn't sleek, not yet. The wires stuck out like veins and the grip was uneven. But it pulsed faintly with life, responding to his touch like something that wanted to be born. He smiled at it the way one might smile at a sleeping child.
"You're going to help me find her, aren't you?"
The machine didn't answer, but the radio crackled in approval. He could have sworn the static hummed those same 3 notes from years ago. He worked without pause for days, barely eating, barely noticing when the sun rose or fell. His father came into the garage once, eyes red, voice slurred. "You ever going to stop building ghosts?" he asked. Rick didn't look up.
"Not until one of them answers back," he said.
His father shook his head and left without closing the door. The wind slipped in, carrying the smell of rain. On the 4th night, Rick powered the device. The portal opened again, cleaner this time, steadier. Through it, he saw not another garage, but a field under strange violet light. The grass moved like water, and the air shimmered with faint laughter. It didn't sound human, but it didn't frighten him. It sounded alive. He reached toward it. This time the portal held. He could feel warmth spilling through, soft like sunlight filtered through memory. For one heartbeat, he thought he saw her silhouette, blurred and shining. But as he leaned closer, the image broke apart into fractals, scattering like glass across his vision. The machine whined, the light bent inward, and then everything went dark again. He fell to his knees, hands trembling. The smell of ozone lingered, and with it, the echo of a voice not entirely gone. He pressed a hand to his chest and whispered, "You're close. I can feel it." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only a wet hush. The sky was pale, uncertain. He stood, wiped his hands on his coat, and looked around the garage. Everything seemed subtly changed, the colors deeper, the air heavier with possibility. He could feel the universe breathing again. For the first time in years, he laughed. It wasn't the sharp, bitter laugh that would later echo through dimensions. It was small, genuine, like the one from the bottle. It felt like remembering something kind. As the morning light seeped in, he picked up the recorder from his desk and pressed play. The hum filled the room, steady and low. And beneath it, he thought he heard her voice once more, whispering something too faint to understand. It didn't matter what it said. It was enough to know it was still there. He set the recorder down, gently, turned off the lights, and whispered to the empty space. "Next time I'll find you. For real." And somewhere, beyond the limits of sight or sense, a small bottle drifted closer, glowing faintly. Inside, laughter rippled again, soft as the beginning of a storm. He never learned how long the portal had stayed open that night. In memory, it felt eternal, a single breath stretched across the fabric of reality. But by morning, all that remained was a faint smell of ozone and the soft whir of the machine cooling down. Rick sat on the floor of the garage, eyes fixed on the place where the light had been, as if staring hard enough could make it return. He didn't know it yet, but something had followed him back. For days after, his dreams were filled with echoes. He'd wake in the middle of the night, certain that someone had whispered his name just as he opened his eyes. Sometimes, when he walked past his machines, they flickered to life without touch. The hum was there again, faint and rhythmic, as if the air itself had learned to breathe beside him. He began to talk to it, half joking, half desperate. "If you're real," he'd say, "then hum twice for yes." And when two soft vibrations rippled through the silence, he'd laugh, not out of madness, but recognition. It wasn't the first time the universe had tried to speak. It was just the first time he'd answered without arrogance. One evening, unable to sleep, he went to the garage again. The storm outside had been kind all day, leaving behind a wet stillness that glowed beneath the porch light. He sat by the portal frame, the unsteady ring of wires and glowing tubes that had once opened the veil between worlds. He wasn't trying to activate it. He only wanted to listen. He placed his palm against the cold metal and closed his eyes. The hum grew stronger. Then came a sound beneath it, a breath, shallow and slow. A voice followed, low and echoing like someone speaking through water. "You found me." Rick froze. His first instinct was disbelief. But when he opened his eyes, there she was, not the woman he remembered, not quite human, not quite ghost. She shimmered at the edge of visibility, her outline flickering with faint golden light. Her face was young, ageless, eyes reflecting entire skies. She smiled the way storms do before rain falls. I don't
understand," Rick murmured. "You will," she said.
Her voice was quiet, every syllable soft as mist. "Oh, you've been listening for so long." He took a step closer. The light between them trembled, but didn't fade.
"Are you—" He stopped himself before the word alive could leave his mouth.
He didn't need to say it. She only tilted her head, as if she heard the question anyway. "Does it matter?" she asked gently. "You've built bridges between worlds, but not all bridges are made to be crossed. Some are made to be remembered." He wanted to ask if she was his mother, if she was the echo from his machine, or some distant version of his own creation speaking back through time. But in her gaze, those questions dissolved. She was all of them and none of them. "I've been trying to find you," he said quietly.
"Ever since I was a kid." "I know." Her smile deepened, though her outline flickered again like an old film reel running out of light.
"You fixed the thunder once," he laughed, but it came out shaky.
"That was a long time ago. Not to the storm," she said. "Every sound still remembers where it began." He looked away, blinking hard.
"I didn't think you were real." "Neither did I," she said, almost playfully. "But here we are." The air between them hummed again, brighter this time, alive with the faint rhythm of her laughter. It wasn't quite human anymore. It shimmered with frequencies his mind couldn't name. He felt it against his skin like warm rain. She stepped closer, and the garage lights dimmed. The outlines of his tools blurred, the world bending softly around her. He reached out, afraid and unafraid, all at once. "Why now?" he whispered. "Because you finally stopped running from silence," she said. "You learned to listen instead of build." The words sank deep into him. He had spent his life filling every quiet space with invention, afraid of what he might hear if he stopped. But now, in her presence, silence wasn't emptiness, it was invitation. She looked toward the machine that had brought her. "You've built a door, Rick, but you still carry the key inside you." "I don't know how to use it." "You will." Her form flickered again, smaller now, her edges dissolving like smoke in sunlight. "This place isn't stable for me. I can't stay long." He felt a sharp pang in his chest, something between grief and awe. "Then tell me who you are." She hesitated, then stepped forward until her light brushed his hand. "I'm what you loved and what you lost," she said softly. "I'm what laughter becomes when no one's left to hear it."
I'm the echo you've been chasing across the stars. Tears burned his eyes before he realized he was crying. "That's not enough." "It has to be," she said, almost whispering.
"Because the rest is something you'll only find when you stop looking." Her hand, or the memory of one, touched his cheek. For an instant warmth spread through him, real and vivid. Then the light dimmed. Her form began to fade. He reached for her, but his fingers passed through air. "Wait," he said, voice breaking. "Please, just tell me how to find you again." She smiled one last time. "You already are." Then she was gone. The hum faded, leaving only the quiet pulse of rain on the roof. Rick stood alone, his breath trembling, his palms still warm, where her light had touched. He wanted to rebuild the machine immediately, to force the portal open again, but something in her tone had stopped him. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It felt alive. He turned off the lights and sat on the cold floor, listening. Somewhere beneath the rhythm of the rain, he could still hear her laughter echoing faintly, wrapped around the hum of the machines like a heartbeat under layers of sound. He stayed there until dawn,
eyes half closed, caught between waking and dream.
He imagined her voice blending with the wind, the syllables threading through every drop of water in the gutter. You fixed the thunder once. When morning came, the garage looked the same, yet somehow changed. Light pooled through the dusty window, touching every surface as if blessing it. The machines were still, silent but peaceful. Rick took a deep breath. The ache in his chest had softened into something gentler. Nostalgia, perhaps? Or acceptance. He stood and looked at the portal frame.
"You're still here," he said quietly. "And so am I." As he spoke, a small spark flickered on the surface of the metal, a faint pulse of gold.
It faded almost immediately, but it was enough. He smiled, a tired, quiet smile, the kind that doesn't reach the mouth but settles behind the eyes. Outside, the rain began again, but softer this time. The thunder rolled once in the distance, gentle as a sigh. He stepped outside into the wet air, letting it touch his skin. For a moment, the world seemed to hum in unison with him, every raindrop, every echo, every quiet breath of wind. And somewhere, far beyond the thin veil of this world, a figure of light smiled too. She was gone but not lost. Her laughter drifted back through the spaces between atoms, filling the silence he once feared with something infinitely kind. Rick tilted his head to the sky, eyes half closed.
"All right," he whispered. "I'll keep listening," the storm answered softly, as if it already knew. Days folded into nights without ceremony.
The storm had gone, but its memory stayed, humming faintly in the walls, whispering in the quiet rhythm of Rick's workshop. The machine sat dormant, a ring of silent steel and faint scorch marks. He didn't touch it for a while.
He didn't need to.
Something had shifted inside him, an ache that once demanded motion now content to rest in stillness. But the universe, as always, had its own plans for what came next. It began with static. Not the kind from broken speakers or faulty wires. This was deeper, an undercurrent that seemed to pulse beneath reality. When Rick walked across the floor, his footsteps echoed seconds later, like the world itself was replaying him. He tried to ignore it, bury himself in trivial tinkering, fixing a coffee grinder, recalibrating old goggles, but the hum would always return. Patient, waiting. One night, as he sat at his desk, the light above him flickered 3 times and went out. The garage was swallowed in darkness. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "All right," he muttered. "What now?" Then faintly came the sound of breathing.
Not his. He froze.
The rhythm was slow, almost deliberate. It came from somewhere behind him, near the portal frame. He turned, pulse quickening. A soft glow began to gather there, pale and trembling, as if drawn through cracks in the air. It wasn't gold this time. It was blue, cold, distant, and sharp. Rick stood, every muscle tense. "Who's there?" The glow pulsed once, answering with silence. Then, slowly, it shaped itself, lines and curves forming into something almost human, but not quite. The face was unfamiliar, its features fluid, constantly shifting as though deciding what to become. When it finally spoke, its voice was not like hers. It carried no warmth, only precision. "You opened a path," it said.
"And paths do not stay one way." Rick's throat tightened. "You're not her." "No," the figure replied, voice layered like overlapping radio frequencies.
"She was a frequency you reached."
"I am what heard the signal first." He felt his pulse rise.
"What do you want?" "To understand why you tried." Rick stepped closer, careful. "You came through the portal?" "In fragments. Your device tore the membrane between observation and existence. We followed the sound of her echo. She's not—" He stopped. The word gone felt wrong. "She's somewhere else." The being tilted its head, as if considering the notion of somewhere. "She was never meant to cross. You invited an echo, and the echo became self-aware. That awareness rippled outward." Rick swallowed hard.
"So you're saying I what? Created her?"
The voice fractured slightly, a shimmer of distortion.
"No, you remembered her."
"And memory is a form of resurrection." He stared at the figure. Its light dimmed and flared with each word, as though emotion were an unfamiliar concept it was still learning to simulate. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "That depends on you," it said. "Your world is changing. You've taught it to listen. Now it's beginning to respond." Outside, thunder rolled, but the sky was clear. Rick turned toward the window. The horizon glowed faintly, not lightning, but something else, an unseen pulse traveling across the air, like a heartbeat. You brought this," the figure continued. "Every act of listening opens a doorway."
"And every doorway asks to be used." Rick's voice dropped to a whisper. "Are you saying she's trapped?" "Not trapped," it replied.
"Dispersed. Her consciousness resides in the spaces between vibration."
"What you call sound is her form now." He felt his chest tighten.
"Then there's a way to reach her again." "There's always a way," the figure said, "but not without consequence." Rick laughed softly, bitterly.
"There always is." The light around the being flickered again, and for a split second he saw her face within it, the faintest impression of that smile, eyes like distant suns. Then it was gone. "Why show me that?"
he demanded, "to remind you that echoes fade if not answered." And with that, the figure began to unravel, its light dissolving into filaments that twisted upward and vanished into the ceiling. The hum in the room deepened, vibrating the floorboards beneath his feet. He was alone again. He stood in the darkness for a long while, staring at the machine. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the main switch. He didn't flip it on, just rested his fingers there. "Not yet," he murmured. When he finally stepped outside, dawn was breaking, painting the horizon in washed-out hues. The air felt charged, alive with invisible energy. He could feel it pressing softly against his skin, like static waiting for a spark. The town was still asleep, unaware that something beneath reality had shifted, but Rick felt it in every breath. The boundary between worlds was thinning. He walked to the edge of his property where the fields stretched into mist. The wind moved strangely, carrying not just sound but fragments of language, half-formed whispers that weren't quite words. He closed his eyes and listened. "Do you remember me?" The voice was hers this time, faint, trembling through the air like the soft brush of fingers against glass. "I never forgot," he whispered. "Then keep the signal alive." He opened his eyes, but the field was empty.
Only the mist remained, swirling faintly in the pale light.
Yet within it, he could still hear that fragile note, sustained just long enough to convince him it was real. Rick returned to the garage. He stood before the portal for what felt like hours, tracing its edges with his eyes, memorizing every imperfection in the metal. He knew what he had to do. Not to rebuild it, but to refine it. Not a weapon against silence, but a conduit for it. He worked for 3 days without sleep. His hands were steady, precise, but his thoughts burned with a strange calm. The hum returned as he worked, not from the machines, but from him. Every breath seemed to vibrate with the memory of her voice. By the third night, the portal stood complete again. Not a harsh ring of steel, but something gentler.
Redesigned with fractal symmetry, almost organic.
It didn't glow. It shimmered like light seen through tears. Rick stood before it, exhaustion softening the sharp edges of his mind. He whispered, "If you're still listening."
"This is for you." Then he flipped the switch. The room didn't explode this time.
It bloomed. The air bent inward, folding into itself, and for one long, impossible moment, the world grew quiet enough for him to hear every heartbeat he'd ever ignored. The silence was vast, beautiful, and full of her. The portal shimmered with soft gold and deep blue intertwined, pulsing together like twin veins of light. Within it, he saw shapes, memories perhaps, or possible futures. Her laughter drifted through again, faint but certain. He stepped closer.
"Tell me what to do," he whispered. The light pulsed once,
like a heartbeat answering his own, and then, through the shimmer, she appeared, not whole, not yet, but clear enough that he could see her eyes. "Don't fix it," she said gently. "Feel it." He reached out his hand.
"I don't want to lose you again." "You never did," she said.
"You just stopped hearing the song." Her image flickered, growing fainter. The hum deepened, vibrating through his bones. "The world is waking," she whispered, "and it's listening too." Rick wanted to speak, but the light grew too bright. It swallowed the room in warmth and color, erasing edges and time. He felt himself dissolve, not vanish, but expand, into sound, into memory, into everything that had ever hummed between silence and life. When the light faded, the garage was empty. Only the portal remained, faintly glowing, humming softly to itself. Outside, the dawn wind carried a new note across the world, gentle, patient, eternal. And somewhere, in the quiet between thunder and breath, two voices whispered together at last. The light from the portal faded slowly, like a candle deciding to sleep. When the air settled, what remained was stillness, soft, immense, aware. Rick stood in the middle of it, or perhaps he didn't. The edges of space had become strange since the last pulse. Sometimes he felt the floor beneath his feet, solid and familiar. Other times it was as though he floated in an echo of his own heartbeat. It was there, in that half-real quiet, that Morty found him. The boy had grown older than he looked, not in years, but in the way some children age through proximity to wonder and fear. He stood at the edge of the workshop, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, watching the dim hum of the machines.
"You've been down here for days," he said softly. "Grandma thought you—"
Disappeared again. Rick didn't turn.
"I'm right here." "Yeah," Morty murmured.
That's what she said last time. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was tired, the kind of quiet that sits between two people who know too much about each other and yet still care enough to stay. Rick finally turned, his eyes pale in the half-light. "What time is it?" "Late," Morty said. "Or early. Depends how you look at it." He moved closer, inspecting the circle of faintly glowing metal.
"Is that the same one?"
Rick's fingers brushed the surface of the frame, tracing a line of light that shimmered like static.
"No, it's an echo of it," Morty frowned.
"You mean a copy?" Rick shook his head. "Nothing that easy. Copies decay. Echoes linger." The boy didn't understand, but he recognized the tone. That thin strand of reverence that sometimes slipped through Rick's sarcasm when he spoke of things that mattered. He leaned against the workbench, eyes catching the faint shimmer of wires coiled like veins. "So what's it do now?" Rick's mouth twitched, a humorless almost smile.
"It listens to what?" "Everything," Rick said.
"Every vibration, every whisper the universe pretends to forget."
"It's
A kind of memory." Morty nodded slowly, though his gaze stayed on Rick's face.
and
"Does it talk back?" Rick hesitated. "Sometimes." The hum in the room deepened, a soft vibration that seemed to respond to their voices. Morty glanced around nervously. "So?
is this like one of those weird energy fields again?"
Am I going to end up like glowing or splitting in two?" Rick chuckled faintly, the sound low, tender even.
"No, Morty, not this time." He sat down, pulling a stool toward him.
The exhaustion in his movement was more than physical. It was cosmic, the weariness of a man who'd carried too much knowledge and too little rest. "Sit down, kid," Morty obeyed, hesitating only a moment before dragging a crate over. The two sat facing the portal, their silhouettes faintly haloed in its glow. After a while, Morty broke the silence. "You've been different lately?" Rick's brow lifted. "Different how?"
"I don't know," Morty said. "Calmer, sadder, maybe?"
"You talk quieter. Like you're afraid someone might hear." Rick smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally realize someone does." Morty frowned.
"You mean her?"
Rick didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the shimmer, where faint shapes drifted. Light patterns that almost looked like faces when the angle was right. Morty followed his gaze, squinting. "You can see her, can't you?" Rick sighed. "Not see, feel, like a song you used to know the words to but forgot halfway through." The boy's eyes softened. "You miss her?" Rick swallowed, the silence stretching again. "Yeah," he said eventually. "More than I thought I could." Morty looked down at his hands. "Mum says missing someone is proof you love them right." "Your mum's smarter than she lets on," Rick murmured. They sat together for a while, the hum becoming softer, slower, like breathing. Then Morty asked, "Do you think she can hear us?" Rick tilted his head, considering. "Maybe not the words, but the feeling behind them." "Yeah, feelings travel further than sound." "That's what I've learned." Morty smiled a little. "So if I think really hard, like, 'Hi, whoever you are,' she'd hear it?" Rick gave a quiet laugh. "Give it a try." Morty closed his eyes, scrunching his face in exaggerated focus. Rick watched. Something unspoken stirring behind his smirk. Pride, maybe, or the fragile ache of seeing innocence survive in a world that shouldn't allow it. When Morty opened his eyes, the hum had shifted. It was subtler now, harmonic, like a chord struck far away but still resonating in their bones. "Did it work?" he whispered. Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, kid. I think it did." They stayed there, not speaking. The air was full of things unsaid, the kind of truths that can't be forced, only shared through quiet company. The glow of the portal dimmed and brightened in gentle waves, reflecting off Morty's eyes. After some time, Morty asked, "Do you ever get scared, Grandpa?"
Rick looked at him, really looked.
"All the time." Even with
All this?
Morty gestured around. The machines, the light, the science that had made gods jealous. Rick's voice was soft, especially with all this. The smarter you get, the more you realize how much can break. And how little you can fix, that actually matters. Morty kicked at the floor gently. But you fix stuff all the time, Rick smiled weakly. Machines, yeah.
Not hearts. The boy thought about that, then said, maybe that's not your job. Rick raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? Whose job is it then?
Morty shrugged. Maybe it's everyone's job, to fix a little piece of the quiet around them. Together it adds up. For a moment, Rick couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and he turned away, pretending to check a wire. The hum from the portal responded again, this time in a note so faint it felt almost like gratitude. Not bad, kid, Rick murmured. Morty smiled shyly.
Guess I've been listening. Yeah, Rick said.
You're getting good at that. The night stretched thin around them. The stars outside pulsed faintly in rhythm with the portal's glow. Rick reached out, turning a small dial. A stream of images flickered, galaxies, distant worlds, fragments of light coalescing into moments. Then one image held steady, a field of long grass under a violet sky.
A woman stood there, hair rippling in invisible wind, her hand raised as though waving. Morty gasped. That's her, isn't it?
Rick didn't move. Yeah. His voice broke on the word. She turned, and her outline shimmered, dissolving into golden mist. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the image faded. Why'd she leave? Morty whispered. Rick leaned back, eyes closing. Maybe because she knew I'd start looking again if she stayed too long. They sat in silence once more, both gazing into the faint afterglow that lingered where the image had been. Eventually Morty stood.
You should get some sleep. Rick smiled faintly without opening his eyes.
Sleep's overrated, maybe, Morty said. But it's free, Rick chuckled, low and weary.
Go on, kid.
I'll be up soon. Morty hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. It was awkward, quick, the kind of hug given not for comfort, but for proof. Rick froze, then slowly placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. The hum swelled, soft and luminous, filling the room with warmth. When Morty left, Rick stayed in the half-light, staring at the portal. The silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt alive, breathing, waiting. He reached for the bottle on his desk, the one that still held faint laughter from long ago. For the first time, he unscrewed the cap. The sound that drifted out was small, almost imperceptible, a fragment of laughter, tender and infinite. It mingled with the hum, completing a note that had been unfinished for years. Rick smiled. Yeah, he whispered to no one and everyone.
You can rest easy.
He's listening now. The portal shimmered one last time before dimming to sleep. Outside, the dawn arrived unnoticed, gentle and slow, carrying the faint echo of a laugh that didn't fade. It simply found a new listener. There are places between universes where even sound forgets itself. Rick had never meant to find one. He'd been following the faint signature of the echo, the same frequency that had hummed in the workshop ever since Morty left that morning, when the fabric of space simply failed to respond. One moment the ship was humming. The next, it was gliding through a silence so total it felt like gravity had stopped believing in itself. He hovered in that stillness, watching the stars outside dim as though turning away. There was no static in the comms, no pulse in the instruments. Even his own breath sounded hesitant, like air uncertain it belonged here. For the first time in years, Rick Sanchez was surrounded by nothing. Not emptiness. Not void, nothing. He tried to speak just to hear his own voice. The words came out, but the sound didn't. His mouth moved, his throat worked, but the air refused to carry meaning. It was a strange mercy, like a kind of enforced peace. He checked the readings again. No coordinates, no dimensional drift. It was as if he'd flown off the edge of reality and into a thought that hadn't finished forming, and yet Something was here, at the edge of the viewport, a shimmer, faint, gentle, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. It wasn't light, not exactly. More like the suggestion of light, the memory of it. He adjusted the ship's course toward it, moving slower than he ever had. Every motion felt like an intrusion. As he approached, the shimmer expanded, unfolding into a landscape that wasn't really a landscape. It had no depth, no horizon, just gradients of pale color, soft as dust. He landed without sound, the ship settling as if cushioned by invisible hands. When the hatch opened, silence rushed in. A living thing, cool and vast. He stepped out. His boots pressed against a surface that looked like sand but left no print. Above him, the sky was a smooth, colorless canvas that shifted faintly whenever he blinked. He started walking. There was no direction, no path. Every step felt the same, yet the view changed, as if space itself was bending to his thoughts. In the distance, faint figures flickered into existence, outlines of people, translucent and still. They stood in clusters, unmoving, like memories suspended mid-thought. Rick hesitated. One of them looked familiar, not in face but in presence. The curve of the shoulders, the weight of quiet around them. He approached. The figure's features sharpened for a second. Eyes half closed, lips parting as if about to speak, and then dissolved into air. Rick froze. His pulse thudded against the silence like a drum in a cathedral.
"Beth," he whispered, though the word didn't travel.
It fell soundlessly at his feet. A wave of warmth passed through him, not from outside, but from within. The air seemed to answer his thought with color. Gold and blue rippled across the horizon, faint and slow like breath through silk. It took him a long moment to understand. This place wasn't dead. It was listening. He sat down on the ground, if it could be called that, and closed his eyes. The silence pressed closer, not hostile, just curious. He let his thoughts drift. He remembered laughter. Not just hers, but Morty's, Summer's, all the half-finished chuckles that had once filled the spaces between his rants. He thought of the workshop, the bottle, the echo of her voice asking him not to fix everything. The air shimmered again. When he opened his eyes, the horizon had changed. The faint figures were gone, replaced by something vast and weightless, a structure of light, a cathedral made of pure resonance. It didn't stand as it floated, gently pulsing with color in time to his heartbeat. He didn't build it, but somehow it recognized him. He walked toward it. The closer he came, the more it felt like stepping into music. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was potential, waiting to become sound. Inside, there were no walls, just layers of translucent shapes, spinning slowly, orbiting one another. He reached out, and when his fingers brushed one, a vibration passed through him. Soft, familiar. It was her laugh.
Not a memory, not an imitation.
The real sound, preserved like light through a prism. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The vibration spread through his body, settling behind his ribs, where regret had lived for so long. When he opened his eyes, she was standing there. Not the echo from before, or this was clearer, calmer, shaped not by sorrow but by acceptance. Her smile was faint, but real. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Rick's throat ached. "You again," he mouthed, though no sound came. She tilted her head, eyes bright with something like joy. Then she reached out her hand. He hesitated. He'd seen too many illusions, too many reflections of himself. But the warmth in her gesture disarmed him. Slowly he reached back. Their fingers met, and the silence broke. It didn't shatter. It blossomed. Sound returned not as noise, but as harmony. Notes rose from the ground, soft as dawn wind. The shapes around them began to hum, filling the space with layers of tone. It wasn't music meant to be heard, it was meant to be felt. Each note seemed to press lightly against his memories, soothing them one by one. Her voice entered the harmony last. It wasn't words, just breath. The same lullaby she'd once hummed when he was too young to understand why people left. The same sound that had lived in his head like a ghost for decades. He closed his eyes, letting it wash through him. He wasn't sure if he was crying or dissolving, or if those things were ever different. The music moved through every part of him, erasing sharpness, smoothing the edges of old guilt. When he opened his eyes again, she was fading, her outlines scattering like dust into the luminous air. He reached for her, but his hand passed through light. This time, though, he didn't feel loss. He felt completion. The silence returned, gentle again, wrapping around him like a blanket. The cathedral dimmed, leaving behind only faint glimmers that floated like lanterns. He watched them rise, hundreds of small lights drifting upward until they vanished into the blank sky. Each one pulsed once, a goodbye, or maybe a thank you. Rick sat there for a long time, staring upward. He realized he wasn't sure how long he'd been gone. Hours, days, maybe years. Time moved differently here, softer, less demanding. Eventually, he stood and walked back toward the ship. The silence followed him like a friend who didn't need to speak. When he stepped inside, the controls flickered to life again. The hum returned, low and steady. The ship seemed to know where to go, but began to turn slowly, aligning itself with a faint shimmer in the distance. Rick took one last look outside. The horizon was brighter now, threaded with gold. He pressed a button on the console, and the portal field began to spin. As the ship lifted, he whispered a single word, though no one was there to hear it. The silence carried it anyway, as if promising to deliver it across every world. Thanks. The moment he crossed the boundary, sound returned in full. The hum of the engines, the beeps of the dashboard, even the faint tremor of his own heartbeat. All of it crashed back like a tide. He exhaled, leaning back in the pilot's chair. The stars ahead shimmered brighter than before. Somewhere, beyond the noise, he thought he heard that same faint laughter again. Not haunting this time, just watching over him. Rick smiled softly, closing his eyes. The ship drifted through the recovering light, and the silence he carried within him stayed, calm and unbroken. In a world that had always demanded noise, he had finally found peace in the quiet between. The ship drifted through layers of soft gold and violet, cutting gently across the trembling membrane of dawn. Rick hadn't realized how long he'd been flying. The silence had followed him, patient and loyal, dissolving slowly into the hum of reality. Stars bloomed back into existence one by one, like a memory returning after grief. He watched them pass without thinking, his hand loose on the throttle, his eyes steady but distant. He didn't feel the usual itch to talk, to mock, to fill space with sound. The quiet that had lived inside the void had followed him home, and it seemed unwilling to let go. Even the ship, usually restless, seemed subdued. No alarms, no sarcastic AI quips, just motion, pure and uninterrupted. It wasn't until he passed the edge of known space that he realized where he was heading. The coordinates had chosen themselves, or maybe he had chosen them without knowing. The old house, the one he hadn't visited in years. He slowed as the blue sphere came into view. The planet looked smaller now, fragile against the dark. He hovered above the familiar skyline, a ghost watching his own life from above. The air below shimmered with the heat of early morning, the faint haze of a city still half asleep. He landed quietly on the outskirts where the fields had begun to overgrow the fences. The ship settled with a sigh. Rick stepped out, the air pressing gently against his skin. It smelled faintly of dew and metal. The house stood ahead of him, still upright, but aged, its edges softened by time. The windows were dark. The grass had grown wild, wrapping itself around the porch steps like memory, clinging to what it could. He walked slowly toward it, each step stirring dust that glowed faintly in the sunlight. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the latch. The silence around him was no longer empty. It was listening again, just as the void had. He opened the door. Inside, the air was still. The faint smell of oil and wire lingered in the walls. The workbench was just as he'd left it. Half-finished gadgets, a disassembled portal gun, notebooks stacked like tombstones of old obsessions. He walked through the hall. The floor creaked under his boots, each sound sharp and brittle in the quiet. In the corner of the room, a photograph lay face down. He picked it up carefully. It was the four of them, Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Morty. All smiling, all unaware of the storm that was their lives. His own face wasn't there, but his reflection stared back faintly from the glass, caught in the angle of the light. He placed the picture back on the table. His fingers lingered on it a moment too long. Then he heard it, faint footsteps on the porch. He didn't move. The door opened slowly, and a figure stepped in, Morty, older now, taller, eyes steadier, but still carrying that same mix of fear and wonder that had once defined him. He stopped in the doorway, the light behind him turning him into a silhouette. "Rick?" Rick turned. The sound of his name felt heavier than it used to. "Hey, kid," he said softly. His voice cracked on the word. You found me." Morty took a step forward, then another. He looked around, the dust, the tools, the photo. His expression softened. "You left without saying anything."
I thought...
He trailed off. Rick waited. "I thought you weren't coming back," Morty finished. Rick looked away, pretending to study the wall. "Didn't plan to. Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air, quiet but sharp. Rick didn't answer immediately. He reached for the nearest object, a broken translocator, its coil bent and lifeless, and turned it over in his hands. "I guess," he said finally.
I ran out of places to hide. Morty stood still watching him.
"You were gone for months. I kept hearing things, stories, rumors, that you went off into some place, some kind of silence." Rick chuckled low and bitter. "Yeah, guess the multiverse finally got tired of listening to me." Morty didn't smile. "Was it real?" Rick looked up. Their eyes met. There was no sarcasm left to shield him, no bitterness to wear like armor. Just the truth, yeah, he said quietly. "It was real."
And it was peaceful. Morty nodded slowly.
He walked to the window, brushing dust from the sill. The sunlight caught his face, and Rick saw the faint lines there. Not of age, but of understanding. The kind of marks life leaves when you've seen too much too young. "You look different," Rick said. "So do you," Morty replied, still facing the window. Rick smiled faintly.
Yeah, I guess I do. They stood in silence.
Outside, wind moved through the grass like a low sigh. After a while, Morty turned back. "You know, I used to think you were invincible. Like you could just outrun anything, even yourself." Rick leaned against the bench, crossing his arms. "You learn eventually that running's just another way of staying lost." Morty tilted his head, studying him.
"So what now?
"You found your peace or whatever?"
You just stay here?"
Rick didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room. The dust, the broken tools, the half-built ideas. He could almost hear his old self laughing, mocking the idea of stillness. But the laughter felt far away now, almost gentle. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I just wanted to remember what quiet looked like when it wasn't empty." Morty took a deep breath. "Summer's been asking about you."
"Mom too," Rick nodded, eyes on the floor.
"They doing okay?" "They're
"Surviving," Morty said.
"We all are." A long pause. Then Rick looked up again. "You want to see something?" Morty frowned. "What?" Rick turned to the bench. From beneath the clutter, he pulled out a small crystal, faintly glowing, almost imperceptible. Its surface shimmered with the same strange softness as the void he'd visited. What is that? Rick held it between his fingers. The glow pulsed in time with his heartbeat.
It's not tech. Not really, just
A piece of where I went. The silence condensed into matter. Morty stared at it. You brought it back? Yeah, Rick said softly.
I thought maybe we could use it. Not to travel. Not to escape.
Just to listen. Morty reached out and Rick handed it to him. The glow shifted slightly in Morty's palm, brightening for a second before fading back to calm. It feels alive, Morty whispered. Rick nodded. It is. Or maybe it's just everything else that's too loud to notice. They stood there, side by side, the crystal glowing faintly between them. After a while, Morty smiled. A small, tired smile, but real.
You know, Rick, I think I get it now. Rick raised an eyebrow.
Get what?
All the noise.
The chaos, the running. You weren't just trying to find something new. You were trying to drown something old. Rick looked at him for a long time. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, Maybe. But I think I finally learned that drowning and silence aren't the same thing. Morty laughed softly, the sound breaking the still air. Yeah, guess not. Rick looked toward the window. The horizon was beginning to shimmer again. That same pale gold from before, diffused through the morning mist. You staying? Morty asked. Rick thought for a long moment. For a while, he said. Long enough to listen. Morty nodded. He placed the crystal back on the bench. Its light spread faintly across the tools, softening the hard lines of metal and wire. As they stood there, the hum of the ship outside grew fainter, almost blending with the wind. The house no longer felt abandoned. It felt like it was breathing again. Rick exhaled, slow and steady. You hungry, kid? Morty blinked.
Yeah, I could eat, Rick smiled. Small, real, almost human.
Good, let's burn something. They stepped outside into the golden light. The grass bent beneath their feet, whispering softly as they walked. Behind them, the crystal's glow flickered once, then steadied, a quiet heartbeat in the dust and air. The silence followed them, gentle and alive, carrying the weight of everything they'd lost and everything they still might find. The morning passed like a slow breath, sunlight spilling over the fields in long, quiet ribbons. Rick sat on the porch, his mug half full, the steam curling upward like smoke from a forgotten dream. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, like something that had learned to coexist with him. Inside, Morty moved around the kitchen humming softly. A tune without words. Something he must have picked up from somewhere else. Some other life. Rick watched the horizon, the line where the sky kissed the land. The light there seemed to hum faintly like the edge of memory. He didn't know if it was the same world he had left behind, or one that had changed just enough to not recognize him. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe recognition was overrated. Morty stepped outside, holding 2 plates. You're up early, he said, setting one down beside Rick. Didn't sleep, Rick replied. Old habit, Morty smiled faintly.
You used to say sleep was for idiots, Rick chuckled.
Still true, but sometimes idiots know what they're doing. They ate quietly. The food wasn't good. Morty had burned the edges, but it was warm. Real. It filled the space between them in a way words couldn't. When they finished, Morty leaned back against the railing.
You going to tell me what that crystal really is?
Rick turned the empty mug in his hands.
It's a memory, or
the absence of one. Hard to say. Come on, Morty said, his voice half teasing, half earnest. Since when do you give vague answers? Rick smirked. Since I started realizing not everything needs explaining, Morty gave him a look.
That's not the Rick I know. That's the point. Rick's tone was soft, but it carried something deeper. Something almost fragile.
The Rick you knew was always running from quiet. Now I'm trying to learn how to live in it. Morty nodded slowly. And what happens when the quiet runs out? Rick didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, moving through the grass with a sound like distant laughter. He stared out at the horizon again, his eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Then we listen harder," he said at last. Morty studied him for a moment, then smiled.
"You've changed," Rick laughed under his breath.
Took the universe long enough to notice. The rest of the day passed softly. They repaired the ship's outer panels, tightened bolts, cleaned out the vents. It wasn't necessary. Rick could have done it in seconds with a single thought. But that wasn't the point anymore. There was something soothing in the rhythm of it. The sound of tools, the faint hum of energy, the unspoken understanding between them. As evening approached, the light shifted into gold again. Morty climbed onto the roof to watch the sunset while Rick stood below, hands deep in a tangle of wiring. "Hey, Rick!" Morty called down. "Do you ever think about what comes after?" Rick squinted up at him.
"After what?"
Morty shrugged.
"After everything, like after the running, after the noise."
"What's left?" Rick thought about it. The wind brushed through his hair, cool and slow. "Maybe nothing," he said. "Or maybe something so quiet you can't hear it until you stop trying to." Morty lay back against the roof, eyes on the orange sky.
"That sounds nice," Rick nodded.
It is. The sun sank lower. The horizon deepened. And somewhere in that space between day and night, something flickered in the sky. Faint at first, then stronger.
A ripple, a shimmer. Rick froze.
His tools slipped from his hand, clattering against the ground. "Morty," he said quietly. "Get down." Morty sat up. "What's wrong?" Rick didn't answer. He just watched the shimmer spread, a thin, curved distortion, like a wound, reopening across the fabric of the sky. The color around it twisted faintly, pulling inward. It wasn't the portal color he recognized. It was softer, more organic, and it pulsed, slowly, like it was breathing. Morty jumped down beside him.
"Is that—"
"Not mine," Rick said. "And not anything I've built." The air hummed. The grass trembled. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the distortion steadied. From its center, a faint sound drifted out. Low, melodic, almost like a voice humming a lullaby. Morty shivered.
"That's kind of beautiful," Rick frowned.
"Yeah, that's what makes it dangerous." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small scanner, one of the old models. Its screen flickered weakly, numbers flashing in impossible sequences. "It's not a portal," he muttered. "It's a resonance."
"A memory echo from where?"
Rick didn't look up. From the void, Morty stepped closer.
"You mean the place you went?"
Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's not supposed to reach this far." The hum grew louder, and the light from the rift began to spill across the field, bending around the trees, painting everything in hues of pale silver. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either, just a strange, perfect neutrality. Morty stared at it, eyes wide.
"It's calming." Rick felt it too, that pull, that quiet allure.
It was the same feeling that had drawn him into the void months ago, the same whisper that had promised peace. He clenched his fists.
"It's not real, Morty. It just feels real."
"That's the trick," Morty hesitated.
"Maybe it's not a trick this time." Rick looked at him sharply. "Don't start romanticizing cosmic anomalies, kid." Morty didn't flinch. "I'm serious. What if it's not trying to hurt us?"
"What if it's trying to remind you of something?" Rick wanted to argue. He wanted to dismiss it with science, sarcasm, or cynicism. Anything to re-establish control. But he couldn't, because part of him knew Morty might be right. The hum changed pitch, becoming softer, closer. Rick felt the ground beneath him vibrate gently. The ship's sensors lit up on their own, scanning data he hadn't asked for. The display formed a shape, the same crystalline pattern as the shard he'd brought back. He turned toward the house. The glow from inside told him the crystal was reacting. "Stay here," he said. Morty frowned.
Rick, just stay! Rick ran inside.
The crystal pulsed wildly, its light expanding in waves. Every pulse seemed to echo through the walls, through him. He reached out, fingers trembling. When he touched it, everything went still. In that silence, he saw flashes, not images, but feelings. The weight of regret, the warmth of laughter, the faint echo of a child's voice saying his name in a tone he hadn't heard in decades. Then for a brief moment, he wasn't in the house anymore. He was standing in the void again, surrounded by that endless hum, the space between thought and memory. But this time, it wasn't empty. A figure stood before him made of light and shadow. He couldn't see a face, but he felt the presence, familiar, comforting, infinitely distant. "You came back," the voice said, not in sound but in vibration. Rick's throat tightened.
Didn't know I was invited. You brought a piece of us with you, the voice said. I called to the rest. Rick shook his head.
"I didn't mean to. Meaning is overrated," the voice replied softly. "You sought silence."
Now it seeks you. The light pulsed once more, and the figure began to fade.
"Don't fear what listens back." Rick reached out, but the space around him dissolved. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the house. The glow had dimmed. The crystal lay quiet again. Outside, Morty called his name. Rick stepped out into the cool night air. The rift was gone. Only the stars remained, still, serene, watching. Morty ran to him. "What happened?" Rick looked up at the sky. "It remembered me," Morty frowned. "What does that mean?" Rick smiled faintly. "I'm not sure yet."
But I think...
"It's learning to say goodbye." They stood there together, the night stretching out around them, soft and endless. The hum was gone, but its echo lingered, like a heartbeat, or maybe a promise. The stars blinked slowly above them, one by one. Neither spoke again for a long time. The next morning came slow, as if time itself had softened overnight. A pale mist curled over the fields, turning every blade of grass into a thread of silver. Rick stood outside, staring at the horizon, the memory of the previous night still flickering in his chest like static. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that figure in the void. Formless, gentle, endless. Its voice had followed him into waking, faint but persistent, humming somewhere behind thought. Morty emerged from the house, rubbing his eyes, still half dreaming. His hair was messy, his voice small. "You didn't come in." Rick didn't turn. "Didn't feel like sleeping." Morty came closer, watching the sky alongside him. "Was it real? What happened?" Rick exhaled slowly. "It was real enough." "Real enough for what?" "For me to stop pretending I know how any of this works." Morty didn't answer. The two of them stood there for a while, listening to the world waking up. Insects whispering through the grass, the distant hum of wind over old fences, the first call of a morning bird breaking the quiet. Rick finally moved, walking back toward the porch. "The rift won't come back," he said.
Not like that. It found what it wanted. Morty followed.
"You?" Rick nodded once. "Yeah, or what's left of me." He sat down heavily on the steps. The wood creaked under his weight, the sound merging with the steady rhythm of his breath. He looked older that morning, not in the face, but in the way his shoulders settled, like something had finally decided to rest. Morty sat beside him. "So, what now?" Rick chuckled quietly. "You keep asking that, kid. You think I ever know?"
I think you used to. Rick smiled faintly.
"Yeah, that's what makes this better." The mist began to lift, revealing the faint blue of the sky. The light touched their faces, and for the first time in a long while, Rick didn't flinch from it. Inside the house, something hummed softly. The crystal again, pulsing once every few seconds, like a heartbeat syncing with theirs. Morty turned his head toward the sound.
It's still active. Yeah, Rick said.
"But calmer now, like it's breathing." Morty frowned.
You make it sound alive. Rick looked at him, eyes glinting.
"Who says it isn't?" Morty thought about that for a long time, then nodded slowly.
Maybe everything's alive, just not the way we understand it, Rick laughed.
Careful, Morty. You start talking like that and the universe will think you're trying to join its poetry club. Morty smiled, but his gaze stayed on the house.
Oh, you think it'll ever talk again? The voice you heard?
Rick's eyes softened.
It already is.
Just quieter now.
Like it's learning to whisper. The day passed without incident, but something in the air had changed.
The silence that had once filled the house was no longer empty. It was layered now, almost textured, as though time itself had decided to sit and stay a while. Rick spent the afternoon repairing small things that didn't need repair. The door hinge, the porch light, an old radio that hadn't worked in decades. Morty watched, helping where he could, asking questions not because he needed answers, but because the rhythm of their exchange had become its own kind of peace. At dusk, when the sky bled into shades of violet, the radio crackled to life. Rick froze. The static wavered, then steadied into a soft, rhythmic pulse, not quite a signal, not quite noise. Morty leaned closer.
Is that?
Rick held up a hand.
Shh, he adjusted the dial.
The static deepened, the pulse aligning perfectly with the crystal's glow inside. The two sounds blended, one through air, one through matter. Then a faint voice emerged. Not words exactly, but tone. The same melodic hum that had come from the rift. Rick sat very still.
It's the same frequency, he murmured.
The void's calling again. Morty's brow furrowed. What does it want now? Rick didn't answer. The sound filled the space between them, soft and endless, like the ocean pressing against the edge of a dream. Then, as quickly as it had started, it faded. The radio clicked off. The crystal stopped glowing. Silence returned. Rick stared at the radio for a long moment, then looked toward Morty. You hear that? Morty nodded. Yeah, it didn't sound bad, Rick smirked. That's what worries me. Night fell quietly. The stars arrived one by one, each glimmer soft enough to touch. Rick and Morty sat outside again, wrapped in the stillness. Morty spoke first.
Do you think it's over?
Rick leaned back in his chair.
Over's a strong word.
I'd settle for resting. Morty chuckled. You ever think the universe just gets tired of us? Rick's eyes traced the stars.
Every day.
But maybe that's the point. Maybe everything gets tired eventually. Stars, people, even time. The trick is learning how to rest without disappearing. Morty let the words settle.
And did you?
Rick turned to look at him. His face was unreadable in the dark, but his voice was steady.
I'm getting there. They fell quiet again.
The night deepened, thick and velvety. The faint sound of crickets rose from the fields, and the house behind them pulsed with the ghost light of the dormant crystal. Then, without warning, Morty spoke again, not out of fear or curiosity, but something softer. You know, Rick, when I was a kid, I used to think you didn't care about anyone. Not really. Rick didn't respond. But now, Morty continued, I think you just cared too much and didn't know what to do with it. Rick's throat tightened. He looked away. Careful, kid.
You're going to make me sentimental, Morty smiled. Would that be so bad?
Rick took a deep breath. The air was cool, the stars impossibly far. Maybe not anymore, the moment stretched. Then, somewhere in the distance, the faint hum returned, not from the crystal or the radio, but from the air itself. A resonance so delicate it could have been imagined. Morty noticed it too. Rick? Rick tilted his head. The hum wove through the night, slow and deliberate, like the echo of something vast and kind. It's everywhere, Rick whispered.
Like it's part of the world now? Morty frowned.
Should we be worried? Rick shook his head. No, not this time. He stood, looking out over the fields. The mist was rising again, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. Every particle shimmered with the same hue as the crystal. Subtle, serene. Morty joined him. It's beautiful, he said softly. Rick's voice lowered to a near whisper. Yeah, it is. They watched as the mist moved closer, curling around their feet, wrapping the house in a gentle glow. The hum deepened, filling their chests like a second heartbeat. And then, faintly, the voice returned. Not from the void, but from within the hum itself. A whisper, soft as breath. Rest, it said. Rick closed his eyes. He didn't fight it. For once, he didn't need to. Morty glanced at him, uncertain. Rick smiled faintly. It's okay, kid. It's not pulling us in this time. It's letting us go. The mist brightened, then slowly began to fade. The hum softened, dissolving into the quiet night. When it was gone, only the sound of the wind remained, calm, rhythmic, alive. Morty looked up at the stars.
You think it'll ever come back?
Rick considered. Maybe, or maybe it never really left. He sat back down, hands resting loosely on his knees. Some things don't vanish, Morty. They just change shape until you can finally understand them. Morty nodded.
Like you? Rick laughed quietly.
Yeah, maybe like me. The night deepened. The house settled into stillness. Somewhere inside, the crystal gave one last, gentle pulse. Not calling, not warning, just existing. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed.
You know, he murmured, for the first time in a long while, I don't feel like running. Morty smiled.
Good. Then maybe we can just sit here for a bit. Rick nodded.
Yeah, just for a bit.
The stars shimmered overhead, slow and eternal. The wind sighed through the fields, carrying the last traces of the hum away into the night. And in that fragile stillness, everything felt right. Not finished, not fixed, but finally at peace. The morning sun rose like a slow confession. Its light poured through the mist in ribbons, brushing the house, the porch, and the fields with an almost sacred stillness. Rick was awake before dawn, standing in the threshold between the shadowed interior and the glowing world outside. His hand rested against the doorframe, fingers tracing the grooves in the old wood, like he was remembering something that had never been written down. Morty stirred on the couch, tangled in a blanket that smelled faintly of ozone and rain. He blinked, disoriented, before spotting Rick's silhouette framed in that soft, amber glow. "You're up early," Morty murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Didn't sleep," Rick said. His tone wasn't weary, just quiet. Morty pushed himself upright. "The voice? You heard it again?" Rick shook his head.
No, it's gone, or...
"It's everywhere. Hard to tell the difference anymore." Morty frowned, pulling the blanket tighter around him.
You think that means it's part of us now?
Rick finally turned. His eyes caught the light, reflecting a glimmer that wasn't entirely his own. Maybe it always was. He stepped outside, boots pressing against the dew-covered boards. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and something electric beneath it, like a storm waiting just beyond sight. Morty followed, hesitant but curious. The world beyond the porch looked subtly altered, colors deeper, edges softer.
Even the silence seemed alive. Rick, Morty said slowly, scanning the horizon. Why does it feel like everything's holding its breath?
Rick gave a half-smile. Because it is. The universe does that sometimes. Right before it changes, Morty looked up. The clouds were drifting slower than usual, like paint suspended in water. The sunlight scattered through them in fractured rainbows, bending reality in small, almost imperceptible ways. Is this normal? Rick chuckled softly. Normal stopped being a thing a long time ago, Morty. They walked into the field, the grass whispering around their legs. Each blade seemed to tremble as they passed, as though sensing something vast moving just beneath the surface of existence. Rick stopped near the old fence, the one that had stood for decades without reason or purpose. He rested his hand on it and closed his eyes. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Morty listened. At first there was nothing, just the wind. But then faintly a tone began to rise. A low hum, familiar and gentle, buried beneath the world's normal noise. "It's the same sound," Morty whispered. "The hum from before," Rick nodded.
"Yeah, but different now. It's
"Harmonic." The air around them shimmered faintly, as if responding to their awareness. Morty took a step back, his pulse quickening. "Rick, is it starting again?" Rick didn't move. His eyes opened, calm and focused. "No, it's not a beginning. It's a continuation. The void didn't leave us, it just changed its language." Morty swallowed hard. "And what's it saying now?" Rick tilted his head. "That depends on how we listen." For a long moment, they stood there, two figures caught in the fragile balance between worlds. The sound deepened, threading through the wind, through the wood of the fence, through their very bones. It was not frightening. It was vast. Morty felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something like awe.
"It feels like
"Like it knows we're here," Rick smiled faintly.
it always did."
"We were just too loud to notice before." The hum grew softer, then faded entirely. The wind shifted, carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. Rick exhaled, long and steady. Morty looked at him carefully. "What happens now?" Rick looked over the horizon, where the mist was beginning to lift. "Now we see what the universe looks like when it forgives itself." They returned to the house as the day unfolded slowly. Inside, the light filtered through dusty windows, painting long gold streaks across the floor. The crystal on the table glimmered faintly. No pulse this time, just a steady, serene glow. Rick picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "You ever notice," he said softly, "how fragile everything looks right before it heals?" Morty sat down across from him.
"You mean like people?"
Rick chuckled.
"Yeah, or time." He placed the crystal back down gently.
It emitted a faint chime like glass resonating against air. The sound lingered for a moment before dissolving. Morty leaned forward.
"Rick, what if this thing isn't a weapon or a key or
"Whatever we thought it was."
what if it's just
"Showing us something?" Rick's gaze softened. "Then maybe we're finally learning to see." Outside, clouds drifted apart, revealing a patch of sky so blue it looked almost unnatural. The world seemed clearer now, as if every particle of air had decided to realign. Hours passed quietly. Rick tinkered with an old circuit board while Morty scribbled sketches of the crystal, the patterns inside it shifting every few minutes. There was no urgency, no chaos, only rhythm steady and human. By late afternoon, Morty noticed something strange. The shadows in the room had begun to move slightly out of sync with their sources, trailing a few seconds behind, as though time itself was lagging. Rick," Morty pointed. "You seeing that?" Rick followed his gaze. Instead of alarm, curiosity flickered in his eyes.
temporal echo?" he said.
"Residual energy from last night's resonance. Is that dangerous?" Rick shrugged. "Only if you're allergic to metaphysics." Morty frowned.
"You're not taking this seriously." Rick looked at him.
"I am, just differently."
Look closer. Morty did.
The shadows weren't random. They were forming faint outlines, almost like reflections of things not present.
One looked like a door, another a figure standing still. "Rick!" "I see it," Rick said quietly.
He stood, stepping toward the shape that resembled a door. As he approached, it shimmered, thin, silver, trembling like heat above desert sand. Without hesitation, Rick reached out. His fingers brushed through the air, and for a moment it felt solid, then warm, then gone. Morty held his breath. What was that? Rick stared at his hand.
"A memory."
But not mine. The shimmer dissolved completely, leaving behind the faint scent of ozone. Morty's voice was almost a whisper. "Whose memory, then?" Rick looked out the window. "The universe's, maybe. Every atom remembers something. Sometimes it just takes the right frequency to make it speak." They stood there in silence for a long time, both unsure whether they had just witnessed science or prayer. As evening fell, the sky turned deep indigo. Fireflies began to emerge across the field, their glow pulsing softly in rhythm with the crystal's faint light. Rick leaned on the window frame, watching them. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe all this, everything we call chaos, is just the universe trying to hum itself back into tune?" Morty smiled slightly. "If it is, it's a pretty nice song," Rick chuckled. "Yeah, not bad for a cosmic improvisation." They ate in silence. The night was calm. The hum no longer filled the air. It had blended into it. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind, every beat of their hearts felt like part of a single, unspoken rhythm. When they stepped outside again, the stars were impossibly bright. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a scar healing in light. Morty looked up, voice soft. "Do you think it's watching us?" Rick smiled faintly. "No, I think it's with us." The wind carried his words away,
scattering them into the night, and for a moment, just a fleeting,
breathless moment, the world felt perfectly aligned. The hum returned once more, so subtle it might have been imagined, so deep it seemed to echo inside their bones. Neither of them spoke.
Neither of them needed to. The sound wasn't calling this time. It was answering. Rick closed his eyes and let it move through him, through every regret, every failure, every forgotten promise.
It didn't erase them. It simply turned them into something softer. When he opened his eyes again, the horizon shimmered faintly, like the edge of a new beginning waiting to be stepped into. "Come on, Morty," he said quietly. "Let's see where it goes." And under the vast, forgiving sky, they walked into the sound. The night unfolded like a quiet breath drawn by the universe itself. The field stretched endlessly before them, silvered by starlight and humming with invisible life. Every few steps Morty glanced at Rick, as if afraid that the man beside him might vanish again into the strange symmetry of the world. But Rick's silhouette stayed constant, solid, calm, illuminated at the edges by the soft pulse of the crystal he carried. They walked without words for what felt like hours. The air had a texture to it now, as though charged with old memory, each inhalation heavy with echoes. Rick's boots pressed lightly into the damp earth, leaving shallow impressions that seemed to fade almost instantly behind him. Finally, Morty broke the silence.
"Rick, where are we going?"
Rick didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the far horizon, where faint ribbons of light swirled lazily in the darkness, like auroras bending too close to the ground. "To the place it all began?" he murmured. Morty frowned. "You mean Earth?" Rick shook his head.
"No, before that."
"Before any of this, there's a place that holds the first hum, the one that started everything."
"I think it's calling us." The lights ahead shimmered, faint but rhythmic, pulsing in tune with something deep beneath their feet.
Morty listened, and slowly his heartbeat began to match it. He glanced up at the stars. They looked different tonight, closer, alive. Some of them seemed to move ever so slightly, their positions rearranging like notes in a song. He thought about the void, the whisper, the way the crystal had first resonated in Rick's hands. Everything had been leading here. "Rick," Morty said quietly, "you're not..."
"Afraid, are you?"
Rick's smile was faint, almost human. "Of course I am. But fear's just the echo of understanding. You only feel it when you're close to something true." Morty looked down at his hands, watching the faint phosphorescent glow that now lingered under his skin. He didn't remember when it started, only that it hadn't felt wrong. It felt like the universe marking him, reminding him that he'd been part of something immense. The ground sloped gently upward. The air grew thinner, laced with a metallic scent. When they reached the ridge, Morty froze. Below them was a valley unlike anything he'd ever seen, filled with light, like an ocean of stars that had spilled onto the earth. A low hum filled the air, the same tone they'd heard before, but now it was layered, thousands of threads intertwining in harmony. The sound wasn't just in the air. It was inside them, shaping their thoughts, slowing their breath. Rick exhaled slowly, eyes wide. So this is it. Morty couldn't look away.
It's beautiful, he whispered. Rick nodded. Yeah, and dangerous. They began to descend.
As they walked through the valley, the lights rose slightly, hovering above the ground. Each flicker of brightness carried a faint image within it. Memories, fragments of other lives, entire universes caught mid-breath. Morty reached toward one. The moment his fingers brushed the light, he gasped. 1,000 sensations flooded through him. Laughter, rain, heartbreak, birth, death, all blending into a single, infinite thread. He stumbled back.
Rick, there! Alive! Rick was watching the lights closely, his expression unreadable.
Not alive, remembered. The universe doesn't forget what it creates. It just stores it differently, Morty shivered. Why would it show us this? Because, Rick said softly, we asked to understand. They walked deeper into the valley, and the hum grew louder, still gentle but vast, like the exhale of a sleeping god. The crystal in Rick's hand vibrated, glowing so bright that Morty had to shield his eyes. Suddenly Rick stopped.
Do you feel that?
Morty nodded.
Yeah, it's like gravity's...
Listening. A faint shimmer appeared in front of them. Circular, fluid, suspended in the air. It looked like water, but it reflected nothing.
Instead, it revealed shifting visions, worlds colliding, stars being born, faces crying and smiling across centuries. Rick stepped closer, his hand trembling slightly. This is what the voice meant, he murmured. It's not a portal, it's memory itself. A living archive, Morty's eyes widened. So the void wasn't trying to destroy anything, it was trying to show you this.
Rick smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe it wanted to remind me that everything I built was already known by something older. He reached out and placed his hand against the shimmering surface. Ripples expanded outward in slow motion, and for a moment, his reflection appeared, not as he was now, but younger, softer, the Rick before the cynicism, before the genius had hardened into armor. Morty saw it too.
That's you, Rick's voice was low. A version of me.
The one who still believed everything could be fixed. The reflection looked at him, then spoke without sound. Rick closed his eyes, listening with his entire body. When he opened them again, there was moisture glistening at the corners. Morty stepped forward carefully. What did it say? Rick looked down, voice trembling. That it forgives me. The air pulsed once, as if the valley itself acknowledged the confession. The hum shifted into a higher tone, lighter, almost melodic. The lights began to swirl around them now, faster and faster, forming a spiral of soft luminescence. Morty grabbed Rick's arm. What's happening? Rick didn't resist. It's aligning.
We opened it.
Now it's showing us what balance looks like. The world around them began to dissolve, not vanish, but blur. The grass, the stars, even their own outlines softened until everything was made of the same faint, breathing light. Time felt elastic. Morty's voice came out in fragments.
Rick, are we dying?
Rick's voice was steady, even serene. No, we're remembering. Shapes flickered through the radiance, images of their lives, moments that had defined them, the first portal gun, the laughter in the garage, every argument, every small kindness they'd pretended not to notice. Each memory folded into the next until they formed a seamless current. Morty reached out, tears spilling silently down his cheeks.
It's all here.
Rick nodded.
Every universe, every mistake, every mercy. The spiral of light tightened, centering on the crystal in Rick's palm.
It pulsed once and then split into two streams, one flowing into Rick, the other into Morty. The air vibrated with quiet warmth. Morty gasped as understanding filled him, not as information, but as feeling. The loneliness, the brilliance, the impossible burden of seeing too much, all of it belonged to Rick. Yet now Morty could feel it too, and beneath it all, a single emotion anchored everything: love. Rick opened his eyes, and for the first time, there was no exhaustion in them.
Only stillness.
"You see it now," he whispered. Morty nodded, his voice breaking.
Yeah, you weren't running from the void.
"You were afraid it would forgive you." Rick smiled softly, and in that moment, every star above them seemed to draw closer. Maybe forgiveness was always the hardest science. The light around them began to fade, returning to soft color, to sky and earth and silence. The valley grew still once more, the hum retreating back into the folds of the world. Rick and Morty stood side by side, breathing slowly, grounded again. The crystal in Rick's hand had gone dark, its purpose complete. Morty looked up at him. "What now?" Rick exhaled. "Now that we go home. The universe doesn't need us to fix it anymore. It just needed us to listen." They turned toward the ridge. Behind them, the valley pulsed one last time.
A farewell heartbeat from the cosmos as they climbed.
Morty glanced back once, feeling that strange, peaceful ache that comes when something eternal has just ended. At the top, Rick paused. The wind brushed through his hair, carrying with it the faint echo of the hum. So distant now, it could have been the sound of the stars breathing. Morty smiled faintly.
You think we'll ever hear it again?
Rick looked at him, eyes tired but kind. "It's not about hearing it, Morty. It's about remembering that it never stopped." And as they began the slow walk back, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, a thin, silver line stretching endlessly forward, like the continuation of a dream they had finally learned to understand. Morning broke quietly over the ridge, soft as breath, warm as memory. The air shimmered faintly, still carrying traces of the hum that had dissolved into dawn. Rick and Morty walked side by side, their steps slow, deliberate. The grass brushed gently against their legs, leaving behind trails of dew that caught the sunlight like fragments of glass. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words felt unnecessary now, too small for the enormity of what had passed. The world seemed subtly rearranged, though nothing outwardly had changed. Birds moved slower in the air. The clouds curved in ways that felt intentional, like brushstrokes from an unseen hand. Even the shadows, faint and fleeting, seemed to linger lovingly before dissolving. Morty exhaled. "It's quiet," he said softly. Rick nodded. "It's supposed to be." They reached the crest of the hill where the house stood, half forgotten, paint peeling, windows glinting faintly. It looked ordinary again, but something inside it, something about it, felt alive. The hum was gone, but the silence that replaced it had a depth to it. Rick pushed open the door. The hinges sighed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and burnt metal. The table was still there, the scattered tools, the marks on the floor, where the crystal's light had once pulsed. Morty stood in the doorway, hesitant. Rick set his coat down on the back of a chair and stared at the spot where the crystal had rested. It was empty now, just a faint indentation in the wood. He touched it gently, as though expecting warmth. Morty watched him. "You miss it already, don't you?" Rick smiled faintly.
Maybe. Or maybe I just missed the noise. Morty walked inside, his footsteps soft. "So what happens now?"
Rick shrugged. "Now we live, I guess. That's the hard part." Outside, the light shifted through the window, painting both of them in uneven gold. Morty leaned against the wall, thinking of everything, the hum, the valley, the forgiveness. It all felt like a dream, but his heart still carried the echo of it. Rick sat down, rubbing his palms together. "You know," he said quietly, "for all the infinite universes I've seen, none of them ever figured it out."
"No one ever solved it."
"The question, I mean," Morty frowned. "What question?" Rick looked up, eyes weary but kind. "Why we exist. Why any of it matters. Everyone tried to prove it with equations, gods, destinies, philosophies. But the answer was just a sound."
"A frequency of being," Morty blinked slowly. The hum?
Rick nodded. Yeah, life's not about understanding the melody. It's about learning to hum along. They sat in silence again, the floor creaking softly beneath them. Morty thought about what Rick had said, about meaning, about memory. He realized that for once, Rick wasn't trying to be clever. He was just being honest. A breeze drifted through the window, carrying the faint scent of rain. The curtains swayed gently, whispering against the frame. Morty broke the silence.
Do you ever think it'll come back?
The sound? Rick leaned back in his chair. It never left. You just stopped noticing it when you stopped listening. Morty thought about that, his eyes following the shifting light on the floor. For the first time in his life, the uncertainty didn't scare him. It felt soft, like the pause between heartbeats. Rick stood, moving slowly, as though each step was part of some quiet ritual. He walked to the window and looked out across the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly, pale blue bleeding into white. Somewhere far off, a flock of birds turned in perfect unison, forming a shape that lasted only an instant before scattering. He smiled. You know, Morty, I used to think peace was a lie. Just another illusion to keep people from asking too many questions. But maybe it's real. Maybe it's what's left when the questions stop mattering. Morty joined him by the window.
You sound
different, Rick laughed softly. Guess I am. The universe sang to me, Morty. Hard to go back to sarcasm after that. Morty grinned, shaking his head. You'll manage? Rick's reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, but not in a sad way. More settled. There was a stillness in him now, a kind of acceptance he'd spent a lifetime resisting. They stood together for a while, watching the world breathe. The air outside shimmered faintly, not with power or danger, but with quiet life. Somewhere the hum returned for a moment, a faint vibration deep in the bones of the earth.
Morty heard it.
Rick did too. But neither of them spoke. They just listened. After a while, Morty asked, "Do you think we changed anything?" Rick turned toward him, eyes soft.
No, we just remembered something everyone else forgot. What's that?
Rick's gaze drifted to the horizon, that everything ends. And that's not a bad thing. Morty felt something tighten in his throat. You mean, you're okay with that now? Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, for the first time I think I am. They went outside, the porch creaking under their weight. The world felt clean after what they'd seen, like it had just been washed in light. Rick sat on the steps, pulling out a small metal flask. He took a slow sip and handed it to Morty. Morty hesitated, then smiled and took it. The liquid burned slightly, warm and sharp. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed. You know, for all the adventures, all the universes, all the chaos, this right here might be my favorite version of reality. Morty laughed quietly. You say that like there's still a choice, Rick smirked. There always is. But sometimes choosing to stay is the bravest thing you can do. A soft rustle came from the field.
A deer stepped into view, its fur glinting silver in the morning light.
It watched them for a moment, ears twitching, before disappearing into the trees. Morty whispered, "Feels like everything's alive again." Rick nodded. That's because it is. The universe's memory resets, but life always hums itself back. The wind carried a low, distant tone, the same one that had followed them through every world, every silence. Only now it was soft, gentle, woven into the rhythm of things. Rick exhaled deeply, a long, slow release that sounded almost like relief. You know, he said, for all my fear of being forgotten, maybe that's the only way to belong. To fade into the music, Morty looked at him, a sad smile tugging at his lips. You really mean that? Rick nodded. Yeah, every note ends. But the song keeps going. They sat there for a long time, watching the sun rise higher, burning away the mist. The house behind them cast a long shadow across the grass, and in that shadow something glowed faintly, small motes of light drifting upward, vanishing one by one into the air. Morty turned.
Rick, look! Rick followed his gaze.
The faint glow shimmered for a moment, forming the outline of the crystal, then dissolved completely, scattering into the wind. He smiled faintly. Guess it found its way home. Morty looked back at him. You think we will too? Rick's eyes softened. We already are. The sky deepened, blue sharpening toward gold. Time felt slower, gentler. Rick leaned his head back, closing his eyes. The lines on his face seemed to ease. Morty sat beside him, quiet. The hum was still there, faint but present, woven into the sound of the wind, the grass, the distant hum of the earth itself. Rick spoke without opening his eyes.
You know, Morty,
If I ever disappear again, don't come looking.
just listen.
I'll be in the hum, Morty swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, I know. A silence settled between them, deep and kind. The light shifted, painting them both in warmth. Rick finally opened his eyes, looking out toward the horizon one last time. It's funny, he said softly. All this time I thought I was running from death. Turns out I was just trying to remember what being alive sounded like. Morty nodded slowly.
And now you do, Rick smiled. A small, tired, beautiful smile.
Yeah, now I do. The hum rose once more, not loud, not grand, just enough to fill the space around them. The grass swayed. The light trembled. The wind carried everything away. Rick's voice came softly and barely audible. Thanks for spending this time with us. Morty looked up at the sky, whispering, Sleep well. Rick closed his eyes, a faint chuckle escaping him.
Everything's gonna be okay, man. The breeze answered with a whisper, carrying their words into infinity.
The hum folded gently into silence. And somewhere, beyond sound, beyond thought, two echoes lingered in the starlight. Resting quietly within the music of everything, the stars had returned, not as distant lights, but as memories, alive, pulsing softly above the quiet earth. Night spread like ink across the horizon, and the wind that whispered through the grass carried faint echoes of laughter, equations, and half-forgotten dreams. Somewhere, a single ember glowed in the dark, a flicker of machinery still breathing. The remnants of Rick's workshop, now hollow and silent, hummed faintly with residual warmth. Morty stood at the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing the constellations. His heart was heavy but not broken. The ache had shape now, like music fading but still lingering in the chest. Behind him, the chair Rick once sat in creaked softly with the wind. He turned, half expecting to see the old man there, flask in hand, gaze fixed somewhere beyond comprehension. But the chair was empty, and the flask lay on the table, a thin ring of condensation marking where it had last touched the wood. Morty walked over, running his fingers across the metal. It was cold. The silence of the place pressed in, familiar now, but no longer hostile. Every corner of the room carried a memory. Rick, leaning over a schematic, muttering to himself. The hiss of the portal gun. The laughter that came only when he forgot to hide it. Morty exhaled and whispered, You said not to come looking.
I'm not, just listening. He stepped outside again, the boards sighing beneath him.
The valley stretched endlessly below, the grass rippling under the moonlight like a sleeping sea. Somewhere out there, the hum was still alive, hidden beneath the rhythm of crickets and the distant rush of wind. For a long time, Morty just stood there. The stars wheeled overhead, patient and ancient. He wondered if Rick was truly gone, or if he'd just folded himself into the melody he'd always chased. Maybe death wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was a returning. The thought comforted him. He turned his gaze toward the horizon. The faintest shimmer of color hovered there, green, blue, violet, like the last remnants of the crystal's light. He followed it down the slope, through the field, where the earth still bore the faint scars of their final experiment. The air hummed softly, as if greeting him. At the center of the clearing, the grass glowed faintly, each blade carrying a hint of phosphorescence. Morty knelt, touching the soil. It was warm, pulsing faintly with life. "Hey," he whispered, unsure who he was talking to.
I think I get it now. The breeze shifted, swirling around him.
He closed his eyes. The hum was faint, but it was there, a vibration deep beneath the skin, gentle, constant, infinite. For a moment, Morty saw flashes, not visions exactly, but impressions. Rick at his workbench laughing with something like wonder. The young Rick before cynicism took root, holding a baby Beth in his arms. Countless versions of him across universes, some cruel, some kind, all searching for the same impossible thing, a reason. The hum wove them together like threads in a vast, unseeable tapestry.
Every version of Rick, every world, every echo, they weren't separate.
They were notes in the same chord. Morty opened his eyes. The field glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed. He smiled faintly.
"Yeah," he said. "I think you figured it out, old man."
He stood slowly. Above him, the stars shimmered brighter, as though hearing him. Somewhere beyond the dark, a low rumble echoed, a sound not of thunder, but of awakening. The portal gun, long since inert, sat half buried in the dirt near the tree line. Morty approached it carefully. It looked different now, duller, quieter, but when he picked it up, he felt a pulse.
Not mechanical, something alive. He turned it over in his hands.
The trigger glowed faintly once, then went dark again. Morty smiled.
"Not yet," he whispered.
"You deserve your rest." He placed it gently back on the ground, covering it with a handful of earth. Above, a shooting star crossed the sky, trailing green light. Morty watched it until it vanished. The night deepened. A soft mist began to rise from the valley, curling like breath. Morty sat down in the grass, leaning back on his elbows. He let his thoughts drift. He remembered the first time he'd met Rick, the smell of chemicals, the impossible inventions, the fear and fascination tangled together. He remembered being angry, scared, in awe. But most of all, he remembered feeling seen. Rick had made him feel like he mattered, even when he pretended not to care, and now, even in his absence, that feeling remained. "Guess that's what you meant, huh?" Morty murmured. "Everything ends, but the song keeps going." The hum answered softly, blending with the whisper of wind through the trees. Time slipped by unnoticed. The moon climbed higher, pale and round, casting silver light across the valley. Shadows lengthened and folded. The glow from the ground slowly faded, leaving only the stars to guide him. Morty eventually rose, brushing dirt from his jeans. He looked one last time at the field. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and kind, an ocean of memory. As he turned to leave, a faint voice brushed the back of his mind. "Not words, not sound, just presence. Everything's going to be okay, man." He smiled through the sting of tears. "Yeah, I know." Back at the house, the lamp by the window flickered once, then steadied. Morty climbed the porch steps and paused at the door. Inside, the workshop waited, silent, timeless. He sat down at the table, pulled a piece of paper toward him, and began to write. Not equations, not plans. Just a note. If you're reading this, it means you're still listening. The hum's still out there. It's not magic, not science. It's everything between. Don't try to find it. Just let it find you. Rick was right. The universe doesn't need meaning. It is meaning.
Every version of us, every mistake, every moment, it all adds up to the same sound. A single endless hum.
Listen carefully. You'll hear him there. He folded the note and left it on the table beside the flask. The night wind rustled the curtains. The hum swelled faintly through the floorboards, like a heartbeat. Morty stepped out once more, standing beneath the stars. The chill in the air bit softly at his skin, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Every sound, the creak of the porch, the sigh of leaves, the faint buzz of distant lights, was part of the same harmony. He looked up. The stars seemed closer now, as if leaning down to listen. He took a deep breath and, almost instinctively, began to hum. It was off-key at first, low and uncertain. Then it steadied, growing softer, deeper, resonating with the rhythm of the night. The sound wrapped around him, became part of him, until he couldn't tell where it ended, and he began. Somewhere far away, beyond galaxies, something hummed back. Morty smiled. "Guess I found you." He kept humming until the sound faded into the wind. The stars brightened, then dimmed again, settling into their eternal positions. The house behind him stood quiet, but not lifeless. The note on the table stirred in the breeze. The flask glinted once in the moonlight, as if catching a reflection from another world. Morty took one last look at the horizon. Dawn was beginning to bleed through, the faintest streaks of gold pushing back the dark. He turned and began walking down the road, the hum following him, low and constant. The world felt new again. Every step he took echoed softly, as though the earth itself was keeping time. He didn't look back. There was nothing to go back to, only forward, only onward, into the melody that never truly ended. The sky shifted from blue to violet to the first light of day. The wind rose gently, lifting his hair, carrying the faintest whisper, one last echo of a familiar voice, laughing quietly between worlds. "Everything's going to be okay."
Man, Morty smiled through the tears and whispered back, "Yeah, it already is." The hum swelled once more, vast and infinite, then softened, dissolving into the sound of morning. And when the first light touched the valley, the world exhaled.
The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was peace. Everything was exactly as it should be. The morning came softly, like a sigh drawn by the universe itself. Light spilled across the valley in long golden strokes, brushing the dew until it shimmered like tiny galaxies upon the grass. Morty stood at the edge of the hill where the air still remembered Rick's hum. The sound had faded through the night, but something inside him kept it alive. A faint pulse, not in his ears, but in his chest. The sun's warmth met the chill that lingered on his skin, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he wasn't waiting for anything. He was simply there. The remnants of the house below caught the new day's light. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but the windows glimmered like the eyes of an old friend waking up after a long rest. Birds moved through the air, tracing invisible arcs, singing in small, secret tones that seemed to understand. The world hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. Morty picked up a stone, turned it in his hand, and smiled. Rick once said that time wasn't a line but a rhythm, that existence repeated itself, not to remind but to refine. Standing there, Morty began to see what he meant. The hum hadn't been a destination, it was a reminder. A way of saying that life wasn't about breaking free of the universe, but moving with it. He made his way back to the porch. The chair still creaked as he sat. The wind brushed his hair. Somewhere behind him, a door clicked gently, though no one was there. Maybe it was just the air shifting. Maybe it was more. He didn't need to know anymore. For a long while, Morty sat in silence, the weight of years balancing gently in his breath. Then, in the quietest tone, he said, "You did it, Rick. You actually did it." The words drifted into the open air. He didn't expect an answer, but a soft shimmer passed through the trees, bending the light in brief liquid waves. He chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He rose, stretching his arms, feeling the warmth soak into his bones. The horizon glowed faintly pink. He could see the city far in the distance, tiny, alive, filled with people who had no idea what had just happened. And maybe that was the point. The greatest miracles often went unnoticed, rippling quietly through the folds of ordinary life. He thought of Summer, of Beth,
Of Jerry. He thought of the versions of them scattered across infinite realities.
some still arguing, some laughing, some gone entirely. He wondered if they too felt this quiet shift, a peace so small it could almost be missed. Walking down the hill, Morty's steps left soft impressions in the earth, each one filled slowly with water from the morning dew, reflecting the sky. He stopped halfway, crouched, and pressed his palm flat to the ground. The hum was still there, faint, yes, but steady, like the world breathing in its sleep. He closed his eyes. The images came unbidden, Rick's laughter echoing through an infinite corridor of universes, the lab glowing green and blue as if the aurora itself had come to rest there. The last time they spoke, Rick's eyes heavy, his voice softer than Morty had ever heard it. "You'll understand someday," he'd said. "The real fear isn't losing control. It's realizing you never had to hold on so tight." Morty hadn't understood then. But now, under this quiet sun, it made sense. He rose again and followed the dirt road leading toward the town. Along the way, he noticed something strange, tiny sprouts of blue-green light glowing at the edges of the path. They looked like flowers, but they pulsed faintly, alive with the same energy that once hummed through Rick's machines. Life was rewriting itself, small and patient. A fox darted across the road ahead of him, pausing for a heartbeat to look back. Its eyes reflected the sky, and for a second Morty swore he saw a flicker of recognition there, as if nature itself remembered him. Then it vanished into the trees. He kept walking. The road turned softer, melting into the morning mist. Each step felt lighter, as though gravity itself had loosened its grip. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, the streets were waking. Windows opened. Someone laughed faintly in the distance. The smell of bread drifted from a bakery nearby, warm and alive. He hadn't noticed before how comforting ordinary sounds could be. The clatter of dishes, the creak of bicycles, the murmur of people simply existing. He bought a small loaf from the baker, an older man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions. "Beautiful morning," the man said. "Yeah," Morty replied softly. "It really is." He ate as he walked, the bread warm in his hands. The taste was simple, grounding. Every bite reminded him that life, despite all its impossible vastness, was built of small, tangible things.
A breath, a sound.
A taste, a memory. By noon the sun sat high, shimmering on the rooftops. Morty stopped by the fountain in the square. Children ran circles around it, their laughter breaking into echoes that rose and fell like the hum of the universe reborn. He sat on the edge, dipping his fingers into the water. The ripples spread outward, each wave catching the light and sending it back. He looked up. The sky was impossibly blue, and for a fleeting moment he saw it again, the faintest shimmer, a tear in the air, like a half-remembered dream. A portal, small and silent, hovering at the far end of the square. He didn't move toward it. He just watched. The glow pulsed once, then twice, then faded, leaving behind only sunlight. Morty smiled.
"You couldn't help yourself, could you?"
He leaned back, hands braced on the edge of the fountain, and closed his eyes. The hum returned, woven through the wind, through the voices around him. He listened. He didn't need to understand the science anymore. He didn't need to chase the infinite. It was already here, inside every sound and silence. The day passed gently, each hour softer than the last. Clouds drifted across the sun, turning light to gold, then silver, then blue. The town settled into its rhythm, unaware that a cosmic fear had been resolved in the quiet heart of a single man. As dusk fell, Morty began walking home. Fireflies blinked along the roadside, lighting his path like tiny galaxies scattered in the grass. The house waited for him, still patient. Inside, everything was as he'd left it. The note lay on the table. The flask gleamed faintly in the fading light. He poured the last drop, held it up to the window, and said softly, "To you." The drink burned, warm and real. He sat in Rick's chair, watching the stars rise. They looked closer tonight, as if leaning in. The hum deepened, soft and endless. He could almost hear Rick's voice carried within it, half a laugh,
half a sigh. "You know," Morty said to the night, "I think I finally get what scared you." The wind rustled gently in reply. "You weren't afraid of dying."
"You were afraid of stopping."
"Of stillness, of peace." He paused, then smiled faintly.
"But it's not so bad, huh? You'd like it." The stars shimmered, bright and quiet. The hum pulsed once more, then softened into something that felt like an embrace. Morty leaned back. The chair creaked. His eyelids grew heavy. Outside, the wind carried whispers across the valley, the rhythm of everything that had been and everything that would be. It folded gently around him, cradling him like the end of a long song. As sleep began to claim him, he murmured, "Thanks, old man, for everything." The stars flickered once in answer. The hum steadied.
Eternal, somewhere between waking and dreaming.
Morty saw him, Rick, standing on a vast horizon made of light, turning back just long enough to smile before dissolving into the glow, and then only quiet, only peace, only the hum. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well."
"Everything's gonna be okay, man."